Welcome back to the Optima Method, where we talk about systems, structure, leadership, operational clarity, and all the ways we can work smarter and not harder. And today, we're talking about something that honestly happens everywhere at work, at home, on teams, in projects, and probably even in marriages. And that is this: the difference between what the data says and what people think is happening. Because let's be honest for a second. Have you ever sat in a meeting where everyone sounds incredibly confident? Everyone's nodding. Everyone says things are moving right along. People are saying that we're making great progress. The customer seems happy. The project is in a really good spot. And then somebody shares the actual dashboard, and we're going from subjective to actually reality. And then suddenly the room gets quiet because the data over there is waving a giant red flag saying, absolutely not. And listen, this is not about calling people out. It's actually the opposite. This episode is about understanding how easy it is for perception, emotion, effort, and assumptions to sometimes cloud the reality. Because effort and progress are not always the same thing. And this can sting a little bit. Here's the funny part. We all do this. You do it, I do it, teams do it, organizations do it. Sometimes we convince ourselves something is improving simply because we are busy. And busy feels productive. But activity does not always equal progress. You can easily have 47 meetings, 22 Teams messages, 16 follow-up emails, a color-coded spreadsheet, and 3 emergency calls, and still not actually move the project forward. Honestly, some projects look incredibly productive from the outside because everybody is exhausted. But exhaustion is not KPI. Being overwhelmed is not a success metric. And that's where data becomes really important. So let's talk about a real scenario that happens all the time. Imagine a customer is going through testing and validation during a project implementation. Everyone feels extremely optimistic. The meetings are happening, updates are being shared, people are talking through issues. The project team is saying, we're getting there. And then the customer sees all of this activity and thinks, okay, things are progressing. But when you pull the testing report and the report says that test cases are failing, defects are increasing, validations are incomplete, timelines are slipping, and adoption rates are low, now suddenly there are two completely different stories happening. The conversation says we're close, but the data actually says we are not close. And this right here is where leadership matters, because weak leadership ignores the disconnect. Strong leadership addresses it and is not afraid of addressing it. So data is truly the reality check. And here's the thing about data. It does not care about feelings. It does not care about assumptions. It does not care about how confident the status update sounded. The data is simply reflecting the outcomes. Now, can data be interpreted incorrectly? Of course. Can metrics sometimes lack context? Absolutely. But measurable outcomes still matters. Because without measurable outcomes, every conversation becomes opinion-based. And opinions are actually really dangerous because this is when they start replacing facts, especially in operations, in leadership, and in project management. The problem with subjective thinking is one of the biggest operational issues I see is when teams begin using feelings as leverage instead of measurable results. You start hearing, I feel like things are getting better. It seems smoother right now. The teams feel a little bit more aligned. I think we're almost done. Okay. But what actually changed? What improved? What metric moved? What validation passed? What process became more efficient? Because confidence without evidence creates the blind spots and things get hidden. And those blind spots in business become extremely expensive. So conversations still matter. Now, before everybody turns into robots obsessed with spreadsheets and data, let me say this clearly. Conversations still matter. It still matters a lot because data tells you what is happening, but the conversations tell you why it's happening. And those two things together, that's where the transformation happens. Because maybe the testing results are poor because the requirements were unclear, training was insufficient, communication broke down, or the process itself was flawed. The data identifies the issue, but the conversation uncovers the root cause. And that's why open dialogue is extremely critical. Not defensive dialogue, not the emotional reactions, not the finger pointing, but just the open conversation. There is a disconnect that happens in organizations, and this is where organizations get stuck sometimes. The data says one thing, people believe another thing, and nobody wants to understand and have that uncomfortable conversation. Because uncomfortable conversations require honesty, and honestly can feel very personal. But avoiding the truth does not fix the problem. It just delays the outcome. And honestly, sometimes the data tells us things we simply do not want to hear. And I recently was told that I needed to stop lecturing. But that was more because I was telling the truth. I was sharing the data. I was sharing based off of experience as a subject matter expert. And those conversations did become difficult, but in the end, it was the truth. Now, this was at the beginning of a project. There was no data that was being shown, but it was a data-driven conversation. And maybe now because it's recorded, and maybe now because this individual did not like what I had to say, in the end, it's going to show that the process is broken. It is going to show that the timeline was unrealistic, that the workload that we're trying to do in an extremely short period of time is too heavy for our resources. It does not even mean that we need to add more people to the project or add more people. It's just because it just isn't reality. And that doesn't make people failures. It just means adjustments are needed, and those adjustments need to be accepted. While you have to have those difficult conversations with customers sometimes in projects, it's realistic. It's the truth. And in the end, having those difficult conversations really matters. And by showing the context behind it, saying that a sales process took longer than it needed to, that also puts the project timeline at risk and actually pushes it out. And that's the reality. So strong leaders use data differently. One thing I've learned in this is that weak leaders use data to blame people. Strong leaders use data to create clarity. And that's a huge difference. The purpose of metrics is not punishment. The purpose is visibility. It's to identify what is truly working versus what is not working, where support is needed and where improvements can happen. We're all human beings. I just mentioned this recently in a conversation. We're humans. We're not robots. So having these conversations may be difficult because if you wait too long until everything is falling apart, the acknowledgement becomes a problem. Now, if you're in reaction mode instead of in leadership mode, you're also going to fail. So it's really important to identify those risks early on, putting the best practices in place, putting the subject matter experts in the right seats, and drive towards the project, giving them the directive of saying, we need to accomplish X by X date, and helping drive those conversations. And if we can't meet it, it's okay. I know there's an end goal that we need to try and accomplish, but in the end, by having those conversations and seeing what can we do, what areas, where do we need to pivot to make it happen? Does it make more sense to bring more people in? Or does it mean that you just need to have that focused time and it comes down to time management to get us where we need to be? It's all about the conversation. but in the end, the data is going to drive those conversations. Here are 3 ways to align conversations with data. The first one is to define what success actually looks like. If success is not measurable, everyone creates their own version of it. So you have to define the goal, the timeline, the metrics, the deliverables, and what done actually means. Clarity removes that confusion. Number 2 is stop using data emotionally. Data should guide the conversation, not attack the people who are doing the work. The moment team feels weaponized by metrics, they actually stop being honest. They actually are going to retract themselves from the need of moving the project forward. Instead, ask, what is this showing us? What changed? What are the blockers? What support is needed? That creates collaboration and a team effort. Number 3 is creating a space for honest dialogue. The people closest to the work usually have the best insight. Trust them, believe in them, listen to them. Because the spreadsheet may show the problem, but the team usually understands the friction causing it. The goal is alignment, not conversation versus data, but conversation supporting by the data. Here are my final thoughts on this conversation. At the end of the day, the data gives us the truth. Conversations give us the context. Leadership brings the two together. And that balance truly matters because businesses do not grow from assumptions. They grow from clarity. And clarity requires visibility, accountability, honest conversations, and measurable outcomes. So the next time you are in a meeting and everybody says, we're doing great, take a look at the data too. Because sometimes a spreadsheet that tells a story nobody wants to say out loud, take a moment to really digest it. And sometimes that's exactly the conversation that needs to happen. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Optima Method. It's truly a pleasure to really share some of my personal feedback, my personal experience. And so if this episode really made you think about how your team or business or organization handles decision-making, accountability, or project visibility, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the goal is not to choose between people and data. The goal is the alignment because when conversations and measurable truth work together, that's where real transformation happens. Until next time, keep building systems that create freedom. I'll see you in the next episode.